It's been almost 4 years now. It's hard to believe. I know I've taken my time and had big gaps here and there, but it was 2017 when I began this series on the life of Christ, and we've gone from the birth through the life that we read about in the Gospels. But it's all been pointing to these sermons that we're in right now. It's all been building up. Even Jesus himself throughout his life had foretold and prophesied that he was going to have to ultimately go to Jerusalem and be betrayed and handed over and crucified and die. But he also promised that he would rise again. Now, our last time that we studied, last Sunday, we talked about the night before Jesus' death. And we talked about his prayer in the garden and how that time was finally concluded with the betrayal of Judas as he brought that guard with him and they arrested Jesus. We talked about the trials that Jesus faced before both the Jewish leaders and the Roman leaders, the mockings and the beatings that he endured. Even in those times, we looked at the grave miscarriage of justice that took place as the Jews falsely accused and falsely convicted Jesus, and as Pilate sought to free Jesus, knowing he was innocent, but ultimately caved to the demands of the mob and the Jewish leaders, and scourged Jesus. And that wasn't enough to slake their bloodlust, and so he finally tried to wash his hands, but of course you can't wash your hands of something like what Pilate was doing and allowing. But he turned Jesus over finally to be crucified. And that's where we ended last Sunday. And today we're going to pick up and we're going to discuss that very dark and difficult day on which Jesus, the Son of God, laid down his life and shed his own blood for our sins. We'll begin with the road that led to Calvary. In Luke chapter 23, Luke says, "And as they led him away, they seized one, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him." We'll stop right there for a moment. The Roman process of crucifixion was calculated at every point and at every turn to inflict the most amount of pain imaginable, to make a demonstration of the person who was being crucified so that nobody would think of committing similar crimes. Nobody wanted to suffer crucifixion. Now, often men were flogged as they walked to the cross, but Jesus had already been flogged. And so instead, they put his own clothes on him. That may have been the most merciful thing that they did to Jesus that day. It wasn't uncommon for them to strip a man and make him march through the streets of the city naked as they flogged him. And so Jesus, they put his clothes back on him. Of course, he's already been flogged and beaten severely, but he has to carry the crossbeam of his own cross. He has to carry the actual instrument that he is going to die upon. Now, there's calculations and estimations, but from what I've read, the minimum weight of this cross or the crossbeam would have probably been at least 75 pounds of rough and hard wood that Jesus is supposed to drag behind him as he marches through the street led by Roman soldiers and jeered by the crowds that looked on. And Jesus is so weak that he cannot continue with the cross, and so the Romans compel a man. They find this man at random who's coming into the city. His name is Simon. He's a Jew from Cyrene. That's the northern coast of Africa. So he's either a proselyte or a Jew that has moved to that area or grown up in that area. He's visiting Jerusalem because it's the week of Passover. And he's coming into the city at this time. And we don't know any of the rest of this man's history. But Mark tells us at least that this is the father of Alexander and Rufus. And so it appears that at least this man's sons, and probably this man himself, became Christians. And we aren't privy to the details of how that came about, but surely carrying the cross of this innocent man, this man that maybe Simon had never seen before, or only heard snippets about, or maybe he knew Jesus very well, we don't know. But carrying the cross perhaps had a great impact on this man. But as this man is conscripted into service to carry the cross for Jesus, and they continue leaving the city, we're told that there was following a great multitude of people. And the women, this could have been the women, it seems like this is the women of Jerusalem, not just the women that minister to Jesus that we'll see later at the cross, but just the women of the city as they see this spectacle and they're mourning and lamenting. But Jesus turns in verse 28 and says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? Jesus had to have mustered a great deal of strength probably at this point just to even be able to speak. But he turns to these women that are wailing and mourning for him at the sad state of what they're witnessing walking through their streets. And Jesus gives one of his final warnings, one of his final prophecies before his death. And it's a prophecy of judgment. Jerusalem was not going to get off scot-free for what it did to Jesus. The people that had rejected Jesus were going to suffer a terrible price. The judgment of God was going to come upon the city. The people had cried out just moments before, Let his blood be upon us and on our children. And the judgment of God was certainly coming. In AD 70, Rome would descend upon Jerusalem and destroy it, in the likes of which the city had likely never seen before. Jesus had prophesied that before, but he's also saying it now. And Jesus says something strange. Basically what Jesus says to these people is that blessing is actually a curse. And a curse could be a blessing. Now, to these people, to be barren, to a woman to be barren at that time, would have been seen as a curse. It would have been seen as something shameful for a woman to be barren, for a woman to never have any children. But Jesus says there's coming a day when those cursed women will actually be blessed. And the reason for that is because it's going to be so terrible. And it's going to be so awful when the city falls and is besieged that the women that don't have to watch their children die, the women that aren't tempted to eat their children like they did in the Old Testament days when they were besieged, the women that are able to flee because they aren't hindered by small babes that are nursing, will actually be the blessed ones. Those who have life, you would think, would be blessed, and yet Jesus says people will be calling to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills cover us. They're seeking death as a release. That's strong language, and that's a picture of the judgment of God. Jesus had said of the one who would betray him, it would have been better for him had he never been born. And one thing that we need to get an understanding of at the very outset is Jesus and everything we're going to talk about this morning. Jesus went through so that we could be freed from the fate of facing God's wrath. Jesus faced God's wrath and bore God's wrath so that we don't have to. But don't ever misunderstand the truth that if we reject that loving sacrifice, and if we reject the lordship of Jesus, we will face God's wrath. And God's wrath is nothing to take lightly. It's nothing to dismiss. God's wrath is a terrible thing. Last week we saw Jesus at the prospect of facing God's wrath for a while, for a temporary amount of time, so distressed that he was sweating great drops of blood. And we made the point of Jesus was so distressed at that prospect. How terrified should we be at the prospect of facing the wrath of God for all eternity? Sometimes we look at people and we may look at our life and think, well, as long as we live a good life, at least there's that. No, at least there's not that. If we suffer for an eternity separated from God, the truth is it would have been better if we would have not been born. It would be better to not have any existence at all than to suffer for our guilt of sin and to suffer for eternity because we caused the death of Jesus through our sin. But Jesus continues through the road, and he is finally taken outside of the city, and he's taken to a place that's called Golgotha. The Latin for that is Calvary. That's where we get that. And that term means place of a skull. It probably was simply a rocky outcrop or cliff of some type that resembled at that time a skull, and that's why it's called that. And this is where the Romans performed these executions and these crucifixions. And one of the interesting things about the Gospels is all four Gospels say essentially the same thing, and it's very simple. They simply say, and there they crucified him. Not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of gory details, simply they crucified him. I'm going to explain the process here in just a moment, but I'm going to do my best to not dwell on it. There may be multiple reasons for this. First of all, the first century Christian readers had no need of a full in-depth explanation of crucifixion. Most of them had probably seen a crucifixion. They knew very well what it meant when Matthew and Mark and Luke and John said that they crucified Jesus. But also perhaps it may be that while we are drawn to the fact that Jesus is willing to suffer such pain for us, and that's something we should be appreciative of, this is not just the entire crux of the matter. It's not just the physical pain of the crucifixion itself, but it's the fact that Jesus is dying for us. Not only that, but the real emphasis is not just on the crucifixion, but what will come later in the resurrection. But before we can get to the resurrection, we must go through the crucifixion. So Jesus is brought to Golgotha or Calvary, and there he's traveled some distance. Of course, he's been beaten and scourged already. They would have laid the crossbeam across the main cross. There are a few different types of crosses, but it seems the one Jesus would have been crucified on was the typical shape we think of, what you might call a lowercase t, because there's a sign and a placard that's going to be nailed above Jesus' head. So they would have fastened in some way that crossbeam to the vertical beam, and they would have laid Jesus down, and you can only imagine the pain that just laying down on that rough wood would bring to a back that had been freshly scourged just moments earlier. They stretch out Jesus' hands along the crossbeam, and with one Roman soldier probably holding the hands down, the other begins to drive nails through the hands of Jesus. Now that may have gone through the palms, or it may have gone somewhere through the wrist. But either way, to imagine these large iron spikes that are several inches long being nailed through the hands or the wrists of Jesus would have shot shooting pains throughout the arms and the shoulders and essentially the entire upper body. And not only the physical pain, but simply the idea, if you step back and try and view the scene, and here is a Roman soldier, a man, who is piercing a nail through the very hand that gave him life. The very hand that one time, long, long ago, took the stars and cast them in place is being pierced by a nail to hold him to a cross. With that completed, they do the same with the other arm, and then they nail his feet to the cross. Commentators and historians still aren't sure exactly how this was done. They may have bent the knees and may have overlapped the feet together and driven one nail through both feet from the top through the wood. There have been excavations of people that they know are crucified that had nails through the heel. And so what may have happened is there may have been a block of wood at the bottom of the cross and the feet put on either side and one long nail driven through both feet to hold the crucifixion victim there. Either way, you can imagine how painful that must have been. To have a nail driven through the feet or through the heels. Again, sending shocks of pain up the legs and through the spine. And not only that, but now that they've got Jesus nailed and secured, they lift that cross and drop it into a hole with all of his weight jarring against the pressure of those nails, with his back scraping against the wood of the cross. And now the agony deepens. Crucifixion was not meant to make a quick end or a merciful end. In fact, sometimes it took days for people to die of crucifixion. In fact, Jesus is going to die in only 6 hours. And Pilate is going to be surprised that Jesus dies so early. But can you imagine 6 hours? That was a short time, but 6 hours. With these shooting and numbing pains going through your body every time there's a twitch of a muscle as your skin and your muscles tear against those nails. To get a breath, a crucifixion victim would have to in some way push up against his feet and pull up on his arms to try and be able to get a breath. And that continues anguishing moment after anguishing moment until ultimately hours, if not days later, the victim would die. And that's what happened to Jesus for 6 hours. Now, we're told also that Jesus was crucified between two thieves. As Jesus is hanging there, we're told that the soldiers divided the garments of the Lord. Now that's an interesting detail. This was probably a pretty common practice, but why do the Gospels tell us that the soldiers are there and they divide Jesus' garment. But he has a tunic that he had, and the tunic is a more valuable garment. It's woven in one piece. And so instead of ruining this tunic, they say, well, let's cast lots for it. And imagine, here's Jesus hanging just feet above these men, and they're gambling for his clothes. Every possible insult that you can think of is being hurled at the Son of God. But that detail is very important. Because at this point, especially if we were to come to this story for the very first time, or if you imagine that you're one of the disciples, thinking, how can this be happening? This should have triggered something, because this has been foretold. In Psalm 22, verse 16 and 18, it says, "For dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." What's that describing? That's describing crucifixion. Specifically, it's describing the crucifixion of Jesus. Why is that important? Because Psalm 22 was written somewhere around 1000 BC. 600 years before crucifixion was even invented as a means of execution, and a full millennia before Jesus died on the cross. We look there and it should tear our hearts out. It should be gut-wrenching to look upon the cross of Jesus and the blood that's flowing from his hands and from the crown of thorns on his head. It should disgust us to see the crowds mocking him and the soldiers gambling for his clothes. But while we're there and we look in disgust and sympathy and pity and guilt, we also don't lose confidence, because this is what God had ordained. Maybe the Romans are in charge of executing Jesus. Maybe the Jews seem to have gotten their way, but God is in control. We can't ever forget that. The disciples forgot it for a time. Everyone else on the scene didn't realize it. But looking back, the gospel writers remember and recall and record for us these events that were all prophesied beforehand. God is accomplishing his will. God's justice is meeting his own mercy with his Son upon the cross. And it's here, as Jesus is now hanging a few feet off the ground upon this cross, that he surveys the soldiers at his feet and the crowd that's passing in and out of Jerusalem and the onlookers that are standing and gawking and mocking him, beginning to mock him, that the first of 7 sayings comes from the lips of our Lord. And Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It's amazing that the first words of Jesus, likely, I think that's right, that these were the first words chronologically, are a statement of forgiveness. Can you imagine people mistreating you even half as bad as they mistreated Jesus? They've brought false witness to him. They've beat him. They've spit in his face. They've scourged him. They falsely accused him. Now they're literally mocking him as he's bleeding out and dying on the cross. And the first thing he has to say about the situation is a prayer asking for forgiveness on their behalf. Now, that should be a lesson to us as we deal with one another, co-workers, neighbors, friends, family, and as people slight us or sin against us or hurt us, and we face that temptation of bearing a grudge, of being unforgiving. Remember Jesus on the cross. Remember the first of these 7 sayings. If Jesus could utter this prayer and this plea that they be forgiven on his behalf, surely we can find it in our hearts to forgive our brothers and sisters in Christ, our friends, our families, our neighbors. And I think that what Jesus is doing here is Jesus is not asking for universal forgiveness without obedience to the gospel. I believe that what Jesus is doing here is, as a man, he is forgiving the personal affronts that had been levied at him. Because Stephen's going to do the same thing. Later on in Acts 7, when Stephen is stoned to death for preaching the gospel, he's going to say the same thing. He's going to say, "Father, forgive them." Now, if it had only been Jesus that said this, we may think that this is Jesus interceding. But Stephen has no right or ability, as a forgiven sinner himself, to ask for the forgiveness of other people's sins. But he does have the right to forgive people of what they've done to him. And Stephen at that point was saying he forgave those people for stoning him. I think Jesus is doing the same thing. Jesus is giving his own forgiveness for the sins that have been wrought against him. Now it's going to be up to mankind to accept the gospel in order to be washed by his blood and to be forgiven of their sins against God. Now the people did act in ignorance. Jesus says, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Peter mentioned this in Acts 3:17, that they acted in ignorance. And Paul even wrote in 1 Corinthians 2 verse 8 that even the rulers of the world didn't know what they were doing, or else they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But the idea of forgiveness is so central, as it should be, because the whole point of this scene, the whole point of Jesus dying on this cross is for forgiveness to be available for mankind. But also the Gospels tell us, in fact all four Gospels include this in some way, that there was a placard that was hung above Jesus' head. This was pretty common for a criminal, and usually these were the worst criminals that were being executed. They would have this placard above their head, and that would be their crime. It would be their accusation. Now in Jesus' case, it's actually not an accusation. It's just a statement. All four Gospels have a slight variation. I've heard people try and say this is a contradiction. They couldn't even get the sign right. But I think if you look at this, you can see that they say the same thing. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. The King of the Jews. This is the King of the Jews. Or Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. What I think probably was on there is this is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Or one explanation that there may be for why these are slightly different is the Gospel writers are simply giving to us the thrust of the message. Or we're also told that this inscription was given 3 times. It was written in Latin and in Greek and in Aramaic. So that would explain. Sometimes translations translate slightly differently. But instead of just getting on the details, I want to focus on the message of what that is. This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And also the idea that it's written in those 3 languages. Aramaic was the primary language of Palestine at that time. Latin was the official language of Rome, and Greek was the primary language throughout the world. In being written in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic, Pilate was actually writing the truth in the widest form available of languages who Jesus is. Now the Jewish leaders didn't like this, and so they go to Pilate and they say, "Don't write this, you need to write, 'He said, I am the King of the Jews.'" But finally, all of a sudden, Pilate has found his backbone that he had misplaced throughout the earlier part of the day, and he won't give in. He says, "What I have written, I have written." Now, part of this was to get back at the Jews. If they were going to twist his arm to the point of making him crucify an innocent man, he was going to promote Jesus to the King of the Jews, and then he was going to kill him. This is Pilate showing the Jews who he thinks is in control. What Pilate doesn't understand is that he has just answered his own question. A while earlier, in speaking with Jesus, Pilate had asked, "What is truth?" And then unwittingly, Pilate actually has it written on the placard that will hang above Jesus' head. This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And in that statement is so much more. He is not just any of the King of the Jews. He is the King. He is the King that has been prophesied of. He is the King that Israel is looking for. As being the King of the Jews, He is also the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that statement is on display for all to see. Now the Gospels all tell us about the mockery that Jesus faced. And He faced it from multiple groups. He faced it from the crowds. These would have been people that had followed or gathered. People were coming in and going. Jerusalem is very busy this Friday before the Sabbath of the Passover week. There's people that have come from all over the world to spend Passover here. And people are coming into the city and going out of the city. And you can imagine the news and the gossip that's spreading about at this point by now about the trials that had taken place. And people that are coming into the city this way are passing the cross, and that may not have been in unusual scene. They may have seen it before, but this one seems to be different and special, and it's gathering a crowd. And they hear why Jesus has been accused, and some of the people have been there throughout the whole time. And they say to Jesus, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." What they're doing is they're showing their ignorance. And when people mock others, that's typically what they do. But they're showing how badly they had misinterpreted Jesus. Jesus had said, "Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again." They had tried to twist that against him in his trial. And these people now are saying, "Well, you're so powerful that you think you could build the temple in 3 days if it had been destroyed. Why can't you come down off that measly cross?" And the sad thing is, he's actually doing exactly what he said he would do. Because the gospel tells us he wasn't speaking about the physical, literal temple. He was speaking about his body. And he had told them, what he had said is, if you tear this down, or when you tear this down, I will build it again in 3 days. That's exactly what's about to happen. We see this same attitude so often from people that oppose God and think that they're so high and mighty, so intelligent, so intellectual. And what we really show when we deny the power of God is our own foolishness and our own rebellion. The Jewish leaders, of course, join in. These chief priests and elders and Pharisaic lawyers and scribes that wouldn't even go into Pilate's hall because they didn't want to dirty themselves before the Passover, are willing to sit at the feet of a dying man and hurl insults at him. You would think that would be beneath the greatest leaders of the Jewish nation, but it's not. They follow Jesus here, and they say similar things. They say, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." I have a question for you. Do you think that if Jesus would have pulled out those nails and kicked off the nails in his feet and landed down in front of them, do you think they would have believed? I think some of them would have. I think some of them that probably had doubt stirring in their hearts even then would have realized and maybe would have believed, but I don't think all of them would. Like, I don't even know if most of them would. They said, "So we can see and believe." What had the last 3 years been about? They'd seen miracle after miracle after miracle. They had the law and the prophets that had pointed forward to Jesus, and they were experts in the law, and they couldn't see it. They had seen Lazarus risen from the dead, and the Gospels say they'd planned to kill him. What do you think they would have done to Jesus if he would have come down from the cross? They would have tried to nail him back up. There was nothing more that could be seen. Their hearts are just hardened to the truth. The soldiers join in. Of course, the soldiers are just doing their job, but they might as well have some fun while they're at it. And so they mock Jesus at the same time and say, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." Now, I would have thought that would have offended some of the Jewish people there. But they hate Jesus more, so they let it go. And the soldiers mock Jesus. And even the thieves. Matthew says that the thieves said the same thing. And we'll talk about one of those thieves in just a moment. But one of them said, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." Now I want you to notice the common thread throughout all of these taunts and the mockery. Save yourself. He cannot save himself. Save yourself and us. The people think that because Jesus can't save himself, then he can't save others, and that's where they're wrong. They are right in this. Jesus cannot save himself and them. Jesus could have answered their taunts. As he had told Peter earlier, he could have called 10,000, or he could have called 12 legions of angels. And this is only speculation on my part. It's just something that plays in my mind's eye, so take it for what it's worth. But I can't help but believe that the host of heaven was ready. I can't help but believe that the angels were sitting there waiting for that command to come and help their Lord. But if Jesus did that and saved himself, he couldn't save them. His blood wouldn't forgive their sins if he comes off the cross. He can't give them eternal life if he takes life now for himself. So they're actually right. He cannot save himself and others. And so Jesus silently allows the abuse to continue, all so that He can save them. Now, one of the thieves we're told about in Luke chapter 23 has a change of heart. And when this one thief says, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us," the other thief turns, and these are compatriots probably. In fact, they're probably compatriots of Barabbas. And he says, "Do you not even fear God, seeing that we are under a just punishment?" He says, "We deserve what we're getting." That's a pretty impressive attitude. Hanging on a cross, suffering miserably, he says, "I deserve this." But Jesus doesn't. And then he says to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." We can't give a sermon. I would love to preach more on the thief on the cross. I can't do that right now. But this man had enough understanding to know that Jesus, who's dying a few feet from him, isn't going to stay dead. He believes Jesus has a kingdom that's coming, and he wants to be a part of it. And thus we have the second saying of Jesus on the cross. He says to this man, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." That didn't take away the physical torment that man was suffering. But what a burden it must have lifted from his soul as he was getting ready to face his Maker for all eternity. What a promise. This man who deserved to be dying on a Roman cross was going to get to enjoy paradise in a few hours. Now that word paradise is exactly what you think it is. It describes a paradise, a beautiful place. The word's used to describe the Garden of Eden. I don't know what you think of paradise is. Maybe a tropical beach, maybe a mountain getaway. Whatever you envision paradise as, we know what paradise is. It's joy, it's comfort, it's luxury. I'm sure heaven will be far greater than anything we can imagine. But I think the real thrust of Jesus' promise is not on the location of paradise. But Jesus says, "Today you will be with me." Anywhere Jesus is will be paradise. And heaven will not be a wonderful place simply because of a street of gold or gates of pearl or the majestic stones that describe that wonderful place in a way. And I'm not saying it's literally that, but you look at that beautiful scene and it paints this wonderful picture of a city we can't even imagine. It's not going to be that makes heaven so great. It's that Jesus will be there. We won't need a sun. We won't need a moon. There won't be any night. Jesus will be there. We'll be with Him. And what a promise for this thief who had wasted and ruined his life and was now dying for it. Didn't waste his eternity. But had the promise that after it was all over, he would be with the Lord. We're introduced to another group of people in the Gospels, and that's the women who were at the cross. John mentions 4 of these ladies. Mark and Matthew have only 3. John lists Jesus' mother Mary and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now Mark and Matthew don't include Jesus' mother in this list, and there's probably a reason. John speaks about these women at the cross. Matthew and Mark speak about the women viewing from a distance at the point at which Jesus died, after Jesus has died. Now, in between that, as we're getting ready to see, Jesus had said something to Mary and to John, basically gave Mary over to the care of John. And so it's probable that before the actual death or shortly thereafter, John and Mary have left. And Matthew and Mark are telling us the women that stay there, observing what takes place from that point on. But I want to just simply point this out. Only one apostle is present, John. Judas has already hanged himself by this point. Peter is somewhere mourning his own betrayal of Jesus. And the other 9 disciples are simply missing in action. We don't know where they're at. They're hiding. But these women are there. They're not afraid of Rome or the Sanhedrin. They're faithfully beside the Lord even in His darkest hours. Sometimes people can surprise us. A thief is the only one willing to confess Jesus as Lord and believe in His kingdom. These women that no other Jewish leader would have thought twice about, they wouldn't have ever spoken to them, are showing what faithfulness looks like. Here in a little while, we'll see a Roman centurion actually deciding who Jesus is. People can surprise us. In fact, we should probably be very careful about getting on our high horse and being too proud about our faith. Because the people that should have been there, the people that were looked to as the strongest and most privileged, they're all on the wrong side of this. But also at this point, Jesus sees his mother. And he says, woman, and that's actually a term of endearment. Dear woman is how some translations render that. Behold your son. And he's speaking about John, the disciple whom he loved. And he says to John, behold your mother. Even in the final hours, even when Jesus is suffering and dying and bleeding, in intense pain and agony, physically, plus he's bearing the sins of humanity, he takes care of his earthly responsibilities. And he takes care of his mother. It's worth noting, Jesus tasks John with caring for Mary, not one of his own siblings. There may be all sorts of reasons for that we won't get into, but the primary point I want to drive home is Jesus' care for his mother is not just secular. He's not just worried about John providing an income for Mary, but he's caring about her spiritually. John is the most fit at this time. He's the only one that's there. And he's the one Jesus trusts most with caring for his mother. Don't neglect your earthly relationships. Don't even let faith become some type of excuse like some of the Pharisees did for neglecting your family relationships. Even in his darkest, most trying hour, Jesus still loved his family and his mother and sought the best. Now we're told at this point that from the 6th hour, at this point Jesus has been on the cross for about 3 hours, but from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. So from that 6th hour would be noon. From noon till 3 o'clock in the afternoon there's darkness. Now people have tried to explain this. They said there's an eclipse. Some people say there was some dust storm somewhere that blocked out the sun. I don't know if you've ever seen a dust storm, but a dust storm doesn't bring darkness like night. Now, an eclipse can. I don't know if you remember the eclipse a few years ago. It was back in 2017 or so, I think. That eclipse came, and the full eclipse you could see in Nashville. I was at the airport in Nashville that day and got to go out and see the eclipse, and it was as dark as night for a couple of seconds. And it all got brighter and brighter. It got a little bit darker until it was pitch black, and then it gets brighter and brighter. The whole thing's over in about 30 minutes. Not 3 hours. It's not dark for 3 hours. What is taking place from noon till 3, the day that Jesus dies, is nothing natural. This is a divine sign. And it's a sign of judgment. Amos 8 verse 9 through 10 uses this sign. And on that day declares the Lord God, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. You can go read the context of that passage. It's judgment language. And this is a sign of God's anger and judgment. Then we come to the fourth of Jesus' sayings at this point. As he cries out, and we're given the Aramaic version and then the translation, my God, why have you forsaken me? I'm positive that there's deeper meaning and significance to this saying than we will ever fully understand. But why does Jesus say this? There's been a lot of theories and ideas about what this means. Some say that it's at this moment that God turned his back on Jesus because he was bearing the sins of the world. Some people say this is when the full force of his punishment is taking place. But the truth is the Bible doesn't explain to us exactly why Jesus said this. And we have to be careful of over-speculation. What we do know and what we can see is this is verbatim what Psalm 22 verse 1 says. And that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus is quoting Psalm 22 verse 1. And by the way, it was a common practice to refer to an entirety of a psalm by referring to the first verse. To people that love and cherish and know the Psalms, when you said, my God, why have you forsaken me? What the typical Jewish mind would have thought of immediately is Psalm 22. And the rest of what that psalm contains and what that psalm says. And so what, if we think about that, is Jesus saying? Well, surely Jesus' cry is one of anguish at the suffering that he's undergoing, spiritually as well as physically, because he is the sin sacrifice of all humanity. But I believe that even here there is a reminder that God is in control. Again, Jesus is quoting a psalm that's been around for 1,000 years, pointing to this very moment. In Psalm 22 verse 1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? But also, and this is something that we don't talk about as much as I think really we should, I think this is a cry of anguish and pain, but I also think that this is a cry of trust and deliverance from Jesus. I don't think Jesus is blaming God for an instant. I don't believe that Jesus doubts God. I don't think Jesus wonders where God has gone. We read the early part of Psalm 22. We often, when we wait upon the Lord's table, read the prophetic elements that clearly speak of the crucifixion. But let's pick up in verse 18. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Let's read the rest of the psalm. Verse 19, but you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. That's all the plea right there. I like the way the New King James does this. It puts a break and separates, because the next part says, you have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. You have rescued me. I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise Him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify Him and stand in awe of Him, all you offspring of Israel. For He has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. Listen to this. And He has not hidden His face from him, but has heard when he cried to Him. Now I fully believe that Jesus faced the wrath of God and suffered the wrath of God, and that He is suffering death on behalf of the sins of humanity. He who should never taste death is tasting death. And I can't explain all of the ways in which He bears our sins, as the later scriptures tell us. But I do think we need to be careful as we poetically speak about how God reacts. Psalm 22 says, He has not hidden His face from His afflicted. Jesus is suffering God's wrath, but He is not left by God. God is allowing Him to die for the sins of mankind, but God is also there with Him and is going to raise Him from the dead. From you comes my praise. This is picking up in verse 25. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will perform before those who fear Him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek Him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever, and all the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations shall worship before you. That all the nations and all the families, that's reminiscent of God's promise to Abraham. In you all the nations and families of the earth will be blessed. The cross is the fulfillment of God's plan and God's promise. The Jews aren't silencing Jesus. Rome's not squelching some uprising. And Satan's not winning. By looking back to Psalm 22, which echoes back to other scriptures, we see that God is doing exactly what God planned. It involves a great deal of pain and suffering. But He's winning this war. I'd like to skip down to verse 31. They shall come and proclaim His righteousness to a people yet unborn, that He has done it. And we'll come back to that final verse in just a moment. Yes, I think this is a cry of anguish and pain and turmoil, but it is also a cry of victory. Jesus then says in John 19:28, I thirst. John tells us this is a fulfillment of prophecy. In Psalm 69 verse 21 it says, they gave me poison for food, and for my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink. When He says, I thirst, the Roman soldiers give Him sour wine. All throughout the Gospels there are markers that God is in control. And then, in John 19:30, Jesus says, it is finished. That's the Greek word tetelestai. It means to complete, conclude, carry out, accomplish. And again, it may be a reference to what we just read in Psalm 22:31, that He has done it. Jesus has accomplished it. Now, Jesus was not finished in the fullest sense. There's still, of course, the resurrection. But the hardest work is completed. The sacrifice has been offered. He has chosen, and this is really the main thing, He has chosen to remain faithful to His and the Father's plan and promise. And He has given His life for the sins of humanity. Thousands of years before Jesus uttered these words, "It is finished," God spoke to a man and a woman and a serpent in the garden. And God there said that one was going to come from the seed of woman, whose heel that serpent was going to bruise. And that has just happened. That promise has been fulfilled. But in so doing, God had also said that that serpent's head would be crushed. And Jesus is keeping that promise. And with all this finished, Jesus finally says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." I don't have time. I've gone long enough already. But go back and read Psalm 31, verses 1 through 5. It uses those same words. But no matter the plans of Satan, no matter the evil deeds of man, God's will is fulfilled. And in that fulfilling, there is a reunion of the Father and the Son and the Spirit. And in the midst of these darkest days and all the pain and the suffering and the shame, and perhaps one of the most ignominious and painful deaths a man has ever suffered, surely the worst in the fact that Jesus has paid the price for man's sins, the Gospels describe Jesus' death like this. After crying out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," they say He bows His head, breathes His last, and gives up His spirit. When you think about it, it's really a very peaceful description of a death that has been brought about by such violence. But the truth is, that is the death of the faithful. Oh, that all of us will be able to face death whenever it comes for us, be it after a long lifetime of service, be it at the end of some dreaded disease, or even if it were to be as a martyr for the Lord. Oh, that we could simply bow our head, give up the spirit, all while saying, "Lord and Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." There's no better place for our spirit to be. It will be far better when our spirits are in the hands of the Lord than when our spirits are trapped in these fleshly tents here below. And with that, Jesus, the very Word of God made flesh, Emmanuel, who is God with us, after 33 years of walking with and as His creation, gives up His spirit and tastes death. The author of life, as Peter calls Him, has died. And when the Son of God dies, creation responds. We're told that the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now this curtain, one writer from ancient times records that it was a handbreadth thick. That's a curtain that thick. It was 60 feet wide and 30 feet tall. Earthquakes don't split curtains. This was not a natural phenomenon. When Jesus died, this is the hand of God ripping that veil between the holy place and the most holy place in the temple. That is God saying the old law is done. That is God saying that system is going away. That is God saying that there is now going to be access through His Son to Him for everyone that is faithful, not just the priests. But the earth shook and the rocks were split. Along with darkness, these are terms and descriptions of judgment. I like the way one thing I read put it, creation's response to the Creator's sin-bearing act. The death of the Creator causes the earth to shake and for the sun to not shine. Oh, that man would respond in such ways. But also we're told that the tombs were opened. Now this is kind of a strange part. You can go read Matthew 27. And it reads there that actually the tombs it's hard to tell when the tombs are opened. But it says in Matthew that the appearance of those saints who had been dead as they go into the city and appear, Matthew says that they did that after the resurrection of Jesus. I always, for some reason, just assumed it happens this day, but Matthew says it actually happens after the resurrection of Jesus, which makes sense. And so we have the curtain torn and the earth shook and tombs opened. And these all teach us things. As we've already mentioned the first two, this resurrection of the others followed Jesus points forward to our resurrection. So one commentator says, the veil between us and God is torn apart by Jesus' death, and the tombs which hold us in death are torn apart by His resurrection. And it's at this point, I'd love to speak more about this, but it's at this point that a Roman centurion, the one who oversaw this death, and who, by the way, was not a squeamish man and just moved by emotion at the sight of a death. This is a man who had probably killed his own fair share of men and overseen numerous executions of this type. But when he saw this, we're told that he said, surely this was the Son of God. Certainly this was an innocent man. A thief can get it. The women are faithful. And even a hardened, violent, Gentile Roman centurion is finally able to see the truth. But what about the rest of the people there? Unfortunately, too many continue in their hard-heartedness as Jesus dies. But also we're told that as he dies, a man named Joseph from Arimathea, he's a member of the council of the Sanhedrin, but he had not been consenting to the death of Jesus. He did not agree with it. In fact, he had actually been a disciple, but secretly up until this point for fear of the Jews. But it says that he takes courage and he goes to Pilate and asks for the body of Jesus. And Pilate grants it to him. Usually they would have just taken Jesus' body, and they probably did this with the thieves, and thrown it into some mass grave. That's what the burial criminals got. Joseph wouldn't allow that to happen, which, by the way, Isaiah 53 foretold that Jesus' burial would be an honorable one. So Joseph has a tomb that's actually very close to the crucifixion. There, close in a garden not far from Golgotha. He has a tomb that he's purchased, and he's going to lay the body of the Lord there. John includes the fact that another man joins him, Nicodemus, who we saw back in John chapter 3, the man who came to Jesus by night. These men have sat in the darkness for long enough. They will not see the body of the Lord disgraced any further. And so together they take the body of the Lord down. They wrap him in a linen garment or linen cloth. They anoint the body with 75 pounds of spices. This is a common practice. And they lay Jesus in that cave in a tomb. And one of the most ominous passages that you can think of, Matthew 27 verse 60. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. And the Sabbath begins. And as we come to this point, Pilate thinks the turmoil has passed and he's navigated the political waters. The Jewish leaders believe they have silenced Jesus. The crowds believe this troublemaker is done. The soldiers who are now guarding the tomb believe they are there to guard a corpse and keep people out. The disciples believe that their hopes are crushed. The women believe there's nothing left but to honor Jesus' body and burial. And likely, the adversary Satan believes that he is won. Why wouldn't everybody think this? After all, Jesus, the Son of God, the eternal Word made flesh, is lying dead behind a stone that seals his tomb. And it is perhaps the darkest day in all of human history. But the darkest days, or the darkest nights, are vanquished by the most glorious sunrises. And despite everybody's fears, and what everybody at that moment believes, and even though Jesus is lying there dead in a tomb, he is not silenced, and he is not finished. He is exactly where he and the Father planned for him to be on that Friday evening almost 2,000 years ago. In a tomb, after dying for the sins of the world. But he's not going to be there long. Because Sunday is coming. The Lord's Day is coming. And I won't say everything changes, because it's not that everything's going to change, it's that everything's going to happen exactly as God intended it. He's going to come forth from that grave. He's going to establish his kingdom. And later he's going to sit down at the right hand of God and bring in the end of days that you and I are still living in. But before all of that could happen, he had to go through the trial. He had to go through the crucifixion. And he had to be slain as the sacrificial Lamb of God so that you and I could have our sins washed away. That's the price that was paid for your soul. That's the lesson this morning. And I hope that it helps us all think about the great price that Jesus was willing to pay for us. And as we bring the sermon to a close and you think on these things, if you're here and you're not a Christian, I want you to realize what God has done, the great lengths God has gone through so that you can be saved. And I hope you'll respond in obedience to the gospel. I hope you believe what you've heard this morning. And believing, I hope it moves you to repent of your sin that Jesus died for. And I hope that you'll confess Jesus as the Son of God. And I hope that you'll make the choice to be baptized, washing away not by the water, but by the blood of Jesus, as you're buried in that watery grave, so that you can die with Him and be raised to newness of life. If you've not done that today, we hope you'll make that choice to do so. And if there's one here who's a Christian that has turned your back on the Lord, repent of that. Confess that fault. Or if you want us to pray with you and for you, we'd be happy to do so. So if there be one in need, we'd invite you to come while we stand and while we sing.